So today we are looking at global and local variables. So we've looked at functions. This is how a function looks like. Alright. Now there are some variables that you can create inside a function, and there are some variables that you create outside functions. These variables that are created outside functions, they are known as global variables. And variables created within a function, they are known as local variables. So B is a global variable, A is a local variable. And the reason we call it local variable is because it is local to that function. It can only be used within this function and not outside the function. But for global variables, they can be used anywhere, whether inside a function or outside a function. Now, once we come here, I will say print B. It is going to print 2. Same way also, if we come inside this function, I will say print B. Once we call on this function, it will print 2. That's because B is a global variable. It can be used anywhere, inside a function or outside a function. Thank you, sir. Now,
So what if both are A?
if you say print A, this will not work. A is only recognized inside this function, not outside of it. If you have another function, okay, sir.
Yeah.
You wanted to ask a question,
What
sir?
if yes, but what if both variables they are A?
Okay. We'll look at that circumstance soon. Whereby we have this here. Let's talk about it now. Here, what happened is that this will create a global variable called A, and inside this place it will create another variable, but this one will be a local variable. So when you call on this function, it will use the local one, but once you're outside this function, it will use the global one. But those both are two different variables. So if I say print A, it will print this 2, because it does not have access to this one, to this local one. This, the A equals to 6, is only available within this function and cannot be used outside of it. Do you get it, sir?
Yes.
Alright, okay. So let's still on local and global variables. Now, when you call on a function, let me expect this B for now. When you call on my func, Python will come here and run the codes here, right? That is when it will create this variable. In fact, when you run this code, when I go to the terminal and I run the code, it will start from the top. It will create this variable. It will see this function, but it will ignore everything inside the function, meaning that as at that time, this variable is yet to be created. It will see this function and ignore everything inside of the function. Then when you now call on the function here, it goes back and create this variable. Then it will print out the variable. When it is done with everything inside this function my func, it will destroy all the local variables. I come again. When you call on a function, Python will run the code inside the function. If it has a local variable, it will create the variable. But when it is done, when it's done with everything inside that function, it will destroy the variable. And that makes global variables to be different from local variables, because local variables are only created when you call on that function, and they are destroyed immediately you are done with the codes inside the function. Immediately Python is done running the codes inside that function, it destroys all the local variables created. So the variable will not stay in memory. When you call on the function the second time, it will run the code here again. It will create another variable, b equals to 6. It will print b. When it is done, since there is no code again to run inside this function, it will destroy that variable b again. Do you understand it, sir? Okay, sir. Now, how does this act of creating and destroying local variables, how does it affect our codes? But before we do that, we also need to look at something about global variables. It is not easy changing the value of a global variable inside a function. In order to make that explanation clearer, I will do something now. What will this give us? Good, thank you, sir. So what happens is that Python will create a variable here, a equals to 4. Here, it will change the content of that container from 4 to 2. Then it will print 2. Now, it's the same container, we are only changing the contents of that container. The same container, but we are changing the content. Now, this is different from this. When we call on my fork, what are we going to see?
Print
2. Thank you, sir. Now we see 2, just like the one I explained just now. But the difference is that in this case there are 2 separate containers. But then once I'm inside this function, it will use the local one. There are 2 separate containers. But just that, once I'm inside this function, it will use the local one. Once I'm outside the function, it will go back to the global one. Now, that means that this a equals to 2 is not changing the content of this global container. Instead, it is creating a separate container instead of changing the content. Because sometimes you want to change the content of this global one. Maybe you want because if you're able to change the content of this global variable, it will make functions to communicate together. Functions can communicate together using variables. So if you're able to change the content, we can make functions to talk together, to communicate together. So how do we do that? In order to do that, what we do is that if you want this a here, a equals to 2, you want it to refer to the global variable, not to the local one. You come here, you have something called global a. That is, what this global a means is that anytime I call on a inside this function, I'm referring to the global variable. What it means is that anytime I'm referring to a within this function, I am referring to the global variable. So when you call on this function, is to do what we have here. Global a means a inside this function is global variable. A equals to 2. So it's going to change the content of the global variable now to 2. It's not going to create a local variable. Then when you say print a, it will print that global variable, which is 2, because the content has been changed to 2. Do you have any questions, sir?
Yes, but will it still destroy it or not?
No, it's not going to destroy it, because it is now the global variable.
Okay, so this 2 will still be there.
Yes, sir. how does that now affect our codes? Let's do this together. So if I run this code, what am I going to see? What will line 10 give me? What will line 11 give me? What will line 12 give me?
Line 10, second function. Point A. But the A is 2, so it will give us 2.
Okay, sir. Line 11.
11, my function. So it will call on my function. Put over A. A is 2. Print A. Then it will give us 2 as well.
Okay, sir. What about line 12?
Line 12, second function again. Same, it will give us 2 as well.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. So let's explain what we have there. When you call on second func, remember I said functions are not, the codes inside functions are ignored until you call on that function. So when you run this code, let's start from this beginning. When you run this code, it will create this global container A equals 4. It will ignore everything here because they are inside the function. It will ignore everything here because it is a function. Right. Then when you call on second func, it will run the codes A. It will print A. A is 4 because you are here to run the codes inside this function. Do you get it, sir?
Yes.
So this is going to print 4. When it's done, it will run this code, my func. So that's when it will run the codes here. So it will change the value of A to 2. It will print A, which is 2. Now the content of A now has changed to 2. Then when you now call on this second func again, since A has changed to 2, it's going to see the new value, which is 2. So this is going to give us 4, 2, 2. Yes, sir. Any questions, sir? Do you have any questions, sir?
No.
Okay, sir. Okay, let's move on. Let's do non-variables. Let's play with this a bit. Let's do it like this. What will this line give me? What will this line give me? What will this line give me?
Line 8, column, line 8, my function. Column my function, it will create A equals to 6, then A equals to 6 plus 2, that is 8, print A. So line 8 will give you 8.
Okay, sir.
Line 9 to create A again because it's my function here. It will create A again.
Okay, sir.
And A equals to 6, then A equals to A plus 2. That's the 8 again.
Okay, sir.
And print 8, you still print 8. That's line 9. Line 10, I think we'll do the same because yes, line 10 will do this because it will keep deleting, destroying the A, so I'll create them again. So I think it's 888.
Correct. Thank you, sir. Correct. 888. Now let's look at something together. If you want the same code, what are we going to get?
Now the first one, my function global A, that's 4. Now A equals to 4 plus 2, print A, that is 6. So line 8 will give 6.
Okay, sir.
Now line 9, call on my function again. Global A as global A is still 4. Then A equals to 4 plus 2. Print A, that's the 6.
Okay, sir.
But hold on. Global A is A equals to 4. A plus 2. Print A. So okay. Line 9 at this time, because this second line, this line 4 has changed A to 4 plus 2, which is now 6.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so line 9 will now give 6 plus 2, that will be 8.
Beautiful. Okay, sir.
So while line 10 will now give 10, what that is 6 plus 2, that was 8. No, it will keep adding to anyway,
Exactly.
because this is
Exactly. You got it right. Sir. You got
4
it
plus
right.
2, 6 plus 2, that's 8. So it will be 4, 6, 8, something like that, or
Exactly.
6, 8, 10.
6, 8, 10. You are right, sir. 6, 8, 10. Right. So this is to explain the difference between local variables and global variables. Now, since you understand the concept so well, which I love, let's now explain when to use local variables and when to use global variables. Now, local variables should be our most preferred choice for most tasks. Some tasks you can choose to use local variables or global variables for them, and they work perfectly. Right? But when we are in the middle of making such decision, we should stick to local variables because it uses less memory. Global variables will always be in memory throughout the period your code will run. While local variables are only in memory when you call on that function, and as long as it's done with that function, it will destroy the local variable. So, 2 is this. Making use of global variables is not ideal because it may cause some issues with developers. Let's say you are working with other people on a particular task, right? You're working with other people. Now, when they say global variable, they start thinking that you use that variable inside multiple functions. But when you have a function and that function has its variables, just the variables that it wants to work with, they are inside of it. You know that everything I need to do will just be inside this function, and you know that you are not really tampering with other. You don't need to tamper with other values. Right? The idea is that local as much as possible, try to use local variables. Now, but there are some instances whereby you have no choice than to use global variables. For instance, whenever a variable will be used by multiple functions, then you need to make it a global variable. If that variable will be used by multiple functions, you need to make it a global variable. Also, if you know that variable, if you want to keep the new value of that variable, just like we did here, we want to add 2 to it and retain the value, the new value that we've changed the value, right? But when we call on that function again, we want that function to see the changed value, then we make it a global variable. So those are the instances whereby you have to use global variables. But aside that, make use of local variables as much as you can. Now, assignments. You want to do a mini bank app, right? Not major one, a mini bank app. And this is how it's going to work. When you run the code, you tell the user to deposit money. So the user will deposit money. First, enter the amount you want to deposit. So the user will enter the amount he or she wants to deposit. After that, we will now ask the user that enter the amount you want to withdraw. You have deposited some amount of money, right? So enter the amount you want to withdraw. So let's assume here I deposited 100,000 naira. Enter the amount you want to withdraw. So let's assume I decide to withdraw 20,000 naira, 20k. So it will print out the balance. It will print out 80k for me. 80k for me. Sorry, lest I forget. Our next class will be on concatenation. Concatenation. The reason I'm saying is it's very likely that I may want to move to another topic, but it's essential that we look at concatenation before we move to another thing. So enter the amount you want to withdraw. 20k. You look at, so you print out 80k. So it's going to print out 80k. So I get 80,000 naira. Print out the balance. When I'm done, if you ask me, do you want to withdraw another amount? Do you want to withdraw more money? One for yes, two for no. If the user selects one, this is what you're going to do. You will run this code again. Enter the amount you want to withdraw. So let's assume the user decides to withdraw 20k again. So you're going to print out 60k now, since I've withdrawn 20k initially and I'm withdrawing 20k again. So this will now be 60,000 naira. If you ask the user again, do you want to withdraw more money? If the user selects one again, you will tell the user to enter the amount you want to withdraw again. If the user decides to withdraw, let's say 10k this time around, the balance will be 50k. It's going to print out the balance, which is 50k. Do you understand it, sir? Now, I cannot withdraw more than I have. But let's assume I deposited 100,000 initially, and I want to withdraw, and I decide to enter 120k here. It will tell me out of balance. It will just print out of balance, and it will. Okay, let's undo that part. Let's assume if I try to give the user above his balance. So this is what you're going to do. You should display print out of balance. And now bring the user back here. So one for yes, two for no. If the user selects one, we do this part. You can enter the amount you want to withdraw. If the user selects no, If the user selects no, it says bye. That will be the end of the program. Do you get it, sir?
Yes.
Alright, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Alright. Thank you.
So we meet on is it Saturday now? Yes,
Yes.
Saturday. Alright, sir. Have a nice day, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.